Good afternoon. My name is Jennifer Gray, and I'm the Public Services Coordinator for FSCJ's Library and Tutoring Services Department. I'd like to welcome you to The Hero of Fort Sumter, The Extraordinary Life of Robert Anderson. Just a little housekeeping before we get started. This event is being recorded, so all attendees have been force muted so that we can avoid any awkward chewing noises or other interruptions. We will, however, have a Q&A session, so feel free to drop your questions in the chat as we go along, and we'll get to them at the end of the presentation. With that out of the way, let's get things started. We're happy to have FSCJ history professor Dr. Wesley Moody with us today to discuss the life of Major Robert Anderson, who served as the commander of the United States Army garrison at Fort Sumter at the start of the Civil War. Anderson is the subject of Dr. Moody's newest book, which is available from University of Oklahoma Press for purchase or from your South Campus Library for checkout. Dr. Moody, please take it away.
Thank you very much. Well, one of the questions that Ms. Gray put to me, I've been asked before, is why Anderson? Why did I choose him? And it really, as an historian, as a writer, it's probably one of the most difficult things is picking a subject that hasn't been done to death and that's worth writing about. And Anderson kind of came on my my radar. I was working on another book. I was working on actually my my PhD dissertation. It was on General Sherman. If you advance the screen, let me see if I could sell another book here. So I was working on this book, and Anderson was a big part of Sherman's life. And of course, the very famous thing about General Sherman is he is in command in Kentucky, the Cumberland Command, and the stress got to him. And he, the newspapers declared, Sherman is insane. Next slide. The little clip there from the newspaper. And so in doing the research, it's like, okay, I should read a biography here of Anderson, just to kind of get the background information. What about this job that's driving Sherman out? What about the guy that had him before it? What happened to him? And as I started looking, there wasn't a biography. Here's somebody that's, he's a major player in the Civil War. Most people knew his name. Kind of shocked that there wasn't a biography of the man. And there was a joke that we had in grad school, and it was, there's a great deal of truth to it. So much has been written on the Civil War, and my next slide, I have a photograph here in Washington D.C. But actually, next slide beyond that. Sorry. There we go. In Washington, D.C., at Ford's Theater, they have this tower, and these are all the books, or just some of the books written about Abraham Lincoln. And this is 5 stories, and hundreds of thousands of books, and this is just on one subject. So, like I said, the joke in grad school Civil War circles is, if the book hasn't been written, there's a reason for it. So when you find something like Anderson, nobody's touched him yet, it's a little intimidating. Okay, what must be the reason there? So question number one I had when I finished the Sherman book, is he worth writing about? Is he important enough to dedicate a book to? And so what happens is a little story here of Robert Anderson, where he comes into the limelight. Of course, November 1861, Lincoln is elected. Next slide, please. The tension grows. South Carolina pulls out of the Union. Mississippi's next, Florida soon after. 7 states, eventually 11 states are going to pull out. And of course, Lincoln's elected in November, doesn't come into power until March. So we have a period of what's going to happen now between those two times. And Anderson, old Army officer, has been in the Army since 1820. A little background here in a moment. The Army is going to send him to South Carolina. They're going to send him to Fort Moultrie. Next slide. What we have in South Carolina, in Charleston Harbor, it's a defensive system. We have, of course, most famously, Fort Sumter sits on an island in the bay or in the harbor, not completed yet, still under construction. You have Fort Moultrie, about a mile, well, less than a mile to the northeast. Between those two and a little bitty Castle Pinckney closer to Charleston, it's a defensive system. If any fleet tries to fight its way through, they get blown to pieces by these 3 forts. And the idea in the pre-Civil War idea is you put a tiny little garrison in these places, less than 100 men, and then when war breaks out, when France declares war or Britain, whoever we happen to go with, you call up the local militia. A position like Fort Sumter takes 1,000 men. So you have 100 regular Army. They will be the leadership. And then when the militia will come in and fill out the rest of the positions. Great system, works well if your enemy is an external threat. When you're facing South Carolina, the people that are behind you and make up that militia that you were counting on, really not the best thought out idea. I mean, we're not thinking about using this to defend against civil war or revolt, which is what we're facing here at this moment. Now, Anderson, they choose Anderson because, and it's one of those, you have to kind of change the mindset when you're thinking about the Civil War as an historian, because right, we know how this ends. We know how this is going to play out. We look back at the Civil War and right, it's this brutal bloodbath. I mean, Gettysburg, Antietam, 700,000 deaths here before we're done. In these months, right after the election, leading up to the start of the war, there was still hope that, right, this is not going to be a war. There's going to be a political solution here. And even if it does turn into conflict, nobody's predicting, like I said, the disaster that's going to be, the massive bloodbath that it's going to turn out to be. So what we want with the man we send there, somebody that's going to hold the line, but isn't going to cause problems, isn't going to cause this whole area to break out into war. And that was Anderson. Professional, not a hothead, nothing along those lines. Now, when he shows up, not to be harsh, I think Anderson shows up and realizes these Charleston folks are maybe a little nutty. Maybe, I mean, the passion is there. This is, we're not going to negotiate an end out of this thing. And if you're South Carolina, I mean, here we are out here. I mean, South Carolina declares its independence in December, and they are declaring themselves the independent Republic of South Carolina. And if you are the independent Republic of South Carolina and your major port, your major access to the outside world is blocked by a foreign army, is blocked by the United States Army sitting there, that's unacceptable to them. So pride and you know, that's all tied up very much into this. And it's starting to look like if you're Anderson there, sitting at Fort Moultrie, it's, like I said, on the map, it's toward the top right-hand corner. He's in an indefensible position. Fort Moultrie, it's a sea battery for the most part. I mean, it's not built to withstand a land attack. And one of the things Anderson would complain about in his reports back to Washington, D.C., is, of course, it's right there on the beach. Of course, Floridians, we know, right, when the wind blows, the sand moves, and at night, the sand would blow up against the walls and just form ramps. And so in the morning, kind of the free range cattle from the area, they'd be in the fort. They'd be standing on the walls. And if you can't keep cattle from just kind of wandering into your fort, how in the world are you going to defend that against an attacking enemy? So December 26th, middle of the night, Anderson secretly moves his troops by water over to unfinished Fort Sumter. Fort Sumter is in a much more defensible position. So next slide. Now, South Carolina, predicting maybe this is going to happen, has patrol boats that are watching, making sure this doesn't happen. So middle of the night, December 26th, he's going to sneak his forces across. Very shady the way, well, not shady is not the right word, but quite strategic in this. And what Anderson's thinking with this is, look, if you're at Fort Moultrie, the militia can attack you. You get attacked by drunken militia, right? And at that point, you have to defend. Hold until relieved is the official order. And if he gets attacked, he has to respond. South Carolinians are killed. There's war. And we're still kind of hoping we're not going to have war here. We're still hope politicians can work something out in Washington, D.C., maybe even holding the Union together. Maybe negotiations, compromises here can happen. If you're in Fort Sumter, you're surrounded by water, it's going to have to be an organized attack. Right? South Carolina is going to have to carry this out. It's not some militia officer giving a bad order. And so maybe we can prevent that first step. Nobody gets killed. We can avoid war, which is still hopefully like the politicians can work something out here. Now, when he gets to Fort Sumter, and when we raise the flag, the way he intended it, as this is the way to preserve the peace, not the way the rest of the country is going to see it. Southerners, right, this is an act of war, right? He was supposed to be at Fort Moultrie. Now he's moved himself in a position where he can fire into Charleston. It's an aggressive anti-South Carolina act to the South Carolinians and to a lot of Southerners. To Northerners, this was a bold act. And to so many Northerners, what we've seen for years now, if not decades, is constant compromise with Southern leadership, constant compromise with what was being called, the great slave power of the South, just constant backing down. And here's a guy that didn't back down. Here's a guy that took bold action, moved across the harbor, and what are you going to do about it? Not his intention, but he becomes a national hero. He is the guy that finally, you know, refuses to compromise with the South. And by becoming that kind of national hero, and he's getting fan mail from all over the country, President Buchanan, a Democrat that would have really liked for all of this problem to go away, he's kind of stuck with Anderson. There's not much he can do with it at this point. And so now we wait out. And while we're waiting, the Confederacy, eventually the Confederacy will be formed February of 61. They begin building up a ring of batteries around Fort Sumter. We're constantly, the South is preparing for a war here to happen, a war to come. And the whole time, I was still kind of hoping maybe we can work out a peaceful solution in this. Now, as the South is building up and Lincoln administration comes in, not exactly sure if they can trust this guy because, right, they don't know him. He was Buchanan's man. Other men sent him down there. And so many U.S. Army officers had resigned as soon as their state left the Union. Where is this guy's loyalty lay? He's from Kentucky. It's a slave-owning state. He is married into a Georgia family, a very Southern family, the Clinches, a local Florida connection there with the Clinches. And we don't know. Kind of as it turns out during the war, maybe this is another project for me down the road. But these officers, these generals, and we're not sure where they're going to go, whether they're going to stay loyal to the Union or join the Confederacy. The pretty sure way to tell is where their wife is from, the loyalty of their wives. Most men follow their wives here. I think it's kind of so. And I can talk about Anderson's wife in a little bit, from a good Georgia family there. So Lincoln's not sure. So poor Anderson is kind of there in the dark. Now his second in command is a fellow by the name of Abner Doubleday. Doubleday is from New York. Doubleday is a hardcore abolitionist, and he is for action. He is for shelling Charleston. Any kind of possible insult to the flag, let's fire, let's go. And eventually, the way this is going to work out, Lincoln is going to attempt to send resupplies to Fort Sumter. Not men, nothing aggressive, firewood, food, type of things you need to survive. And Lincoln brilliantly played. It puts South Carolina in the position of either you allow Fort Sumter to be resupplied, which means Anderson and his men can stay there forever, or you stop it. You capture Fort Sumter, and South Carolina is going to choose option number 2. They're going to fire on Fort Sumter, April 1861. The war begins here in Charleston, South Carolina, here at Fort Sumter. Now, the fact that the South fired the first shots of this war, they first fired on the American flag, they fired on American troops, they fired on an American hero here in Robert Anderson. I mean, the North loving him here at this point. It rallies the North. It rallies Lincoln gets support. Lincoln gets whatever he wants the next 2 years. The group that might have said, let them go if they want to go, they're not there. I mean, the South's a threat. They fired on U.S. troops. They fired on Robert Anderson here. He's an American hero. Had Anderson been aggressive, we don't get that. Had Anderson given up and he not taken bold action, we probably don't get that. So Anderson, the way this plays out, the war happens the way it does. The North fights this war. The North wins this war, and everything that comes with it. And not planned, obviously, but Anderson. Long story short, here, I mean, Anderson's very important. We had Doubleday in command. The North's the aggressor. You don't get Democratic support for the Republican Party. Had someone else been in command that would have resigned right away, this is whole completely different. Now, following this, Anderson's health is ruined. I mean, he's had a rough life. Army life is rough, fighting in other places. The stress here I mean, you're an Army major. You're not trained for this. And the future of the entire country, we're gonna drop on you here at this point. If you'll flip over to the next slide. There we are, the war starting. Next slide too. Yeah, Anderson's not looking good in this picture. I mean, his health's ruined. The stress has gotten to him. Everybody that sees him say, yeah, this is the guy. Right, maybe time for the retirement home here. Lincoln's got another job for him. Any question about, what Lincoln thought of Anderson, whether he was loyal or not, that comes up in some later books. No. Lincoln appreciates what he did, and he's got another job for him. We have to send you to Kentucky. Now, you go to my next slide here. I've got a map of the Confederates. There we go. Our border states, Missouri, Kentucky, Maryland. If we're going to fight a war here as the United States, if we're going to be successful, those border states are very, very important. If you're the Confederacy and you get Missouri, Kentucky, and Maryland, slave-owning states, to join the Confederacy, this is a whole entirely different situation. The war then is being fought in Illinois, Indiana, and Ohio. The border would be that very defensible Ohio River. So these are key areas. Lincoln wants to send Anderson back to Kentucky. Go back and take command of that state, keep them in the Union. And this is as politically tricky position as was Charleston, maybe even more so at this point. Kentucky declares itself neutral when this war breaks out. Kind of an interesting option, but they would like to just sit this thing out. So Anderson, as a Kentuckian, going to go to Kentucky. He's going to raise troops and keep them neutral is good. Union side is better, but just making sure they don't get pulled into the Confederacy. We have a pro-Confederate governor. We have a pro-Union state legislature. Kentucky is a complicated mess. Anderson hold on there until the Confederacy is going to make some mistakes and drive Kentucky into the Union. And at that time, still a rough position. Anderson's done. And like I said, health is destroyed. He's too old for this. It's time to retire. And it's this point that Sherman inherits the position. Sherman takes over in Kentucky. He's a young man. He's in his early 30s, Sherman is. But it's too much for him. He has what a lot of people assume was a nervous breakdown when he took command. But Anderson, very important, hold on, keeps Kentucky in the Union, changes the entire nature of the war. What he does in Charleston shapes the way this war breaks out. Union support for Lincoln, right, I don't think is there without this. So at this point, as I try to, this guy worth writing a book about, I mean, I'd say yes, it's a very important character. I don't think he gets nearly the attention he deserves because of this. His health is ruined once again. Now, second question, of course, somebody hasn't had a biography written of them, and they're a Civil War general. Like I said, because they're not important. I think Anderson definitely was. The second question, maybe you don't have a bio because everything else was boring, right? It's just not a good story, right? You have what happened at Charleston, and anybody writing history of Fort Sumter, there's a good bit of that in there. Maybe nobody's touched Anderson up at this point because the rest of his life just wasn't that interesting. Because you can write a book and, hey, this is history. It needs to be told. It needs to be, we're all academics here. But at the end of the day, you've got to get a publisher to want to publish this because there will be people out there that will want to read it. So you are kind of limited. Hey, it's got to be a good story. And so it's the rest of his life, an interesting story. And every step of the way, I'm waiting for the brick wall. I'm waiting for, okay, this guy spends all of his career at a desk, besides his one moment at Charleston, one moment here at the beginning of the Civil War. And that is simply not the case. For the first 60 years of his life, Anderson is intertwined with really the most important events and people in antebellum America during his life and post. Next slide, if you will. He meets John Adams to Theodore Roosevelt. He'll know both of these men passing, but he will meet them. That's quite a spread there. Second president of the United States to our first 19th century or 20th century president here, Theodore Roosevelt. His father was a Revolutionary War vet. Next slide. And Colonel Richard Clow here. Not only was he an officer in the Continental Army, Anderson crossed the Delaware with George Washington. He was at the famous crossing here. And this, of course, was December 25th, 1775. December 26th, 1861. Anderson, in the middle of the night, crosses Charleston Harbor, just as his father before him crossed the Delaware. One night off. Anderson had actually was thinking Christmas, was thinking December 25th, and the weather put it off a day. So it would have been much more fitting and poetic had he been a day earlier. So, father and son here at this point. As a reward for his service in the Revolutionary War, he was given land in Kentucky, land in Louisville, His was the position. He's given land, and others that are given land, he sends them where they need to be. He's the one that's doing the handing out out in Kentucky. And Colonel Anderson here will be a very wealthy man out there in Louisville, in Western Kentucky. Two wives. His first wife was a Clark. Her brother was William Clark of Lewis and Clark fame. George Rogers Clark, another brother there. She died. He remarried, and his second wife was a marshal, and her brother was John Marshall, Chief Justice of the U.S. Supreme Court. So, I mean, there's family connections here. The colonel's home in Louisville. Anybody important passing through the West visited the colonel's home there in Louisville. Next slide. Just a few of the important people that passed through town that had dinner with little Robert Anderson watching along. We have Lewis and Clark, John Marshall, Andrew Jackson was a common visitor. When Andrew Jackson showed up, he'd take off his coat, he'd roughhouse with the kids. At one point, Anderson's a little boy, and Jackson picks him up by his ears. Probably a little overly done, but little boys like that kind of stuff. The famous French General Lafayette, President Madison, even some old enemies. The famous warrior chief Little Turtle, who was responsible for the worst defeat the United States Army will ever face. He comes by. Henry Clay, future President Zachary Taylor, a friend of Anderson's brother, and for a short period, dated one of Anderson's sisters. So this is a family that is connected. 15 years old, Anderson goes off to West Point to get his military education. Next slide. West Point it's an engineering school out there on the isolated Hudson River Valley. This is where the man is buried today, in the cemetery at West Point. He goes to West Point. We have just recently completely redone the curriculum of the academy, making it the way the academy is going to be when it trains most of the Civil War generals. More modern, up-to-date curriculum there. Anderson's class of 25 will be the first that graduates under that new system. His commission to West Point is signed by, of course, the famous John C. Calhoun, who was a friend of the brother. Like I said, very much family connections here. Graduates from West Point into the artillery. That's where the top graduates go to the engineering. Second group goes to artillery, and those that graduate at the bottom go into the infantry. So Anderson's kind of a middle group here, but very, very professional throughout. I mean, it kind of marks Anderson's life as he is that very, very professional Army officer in every way. Now, after West Point, as an artillery officer and sometimes what is called a red-legged infantryman, that's an artillery officer that we need you to serve in the infantry when we're not needing cannon. Anderson will serve in every major conflict the United States faces, from his graduation at West Point until the Civil War, and including the Civil War. He fights in the Black Hawk War up in Wisconsin. Next slide. During the Black Hawk War, and he fights in the major battle, the Battle of Bad Axe there. He serves with future Confederate President Jefferson Davis, and he will swear into service a young militia officer by the name of Abraham Lincoln. He won't remember Lincoln afterwards because he dealt with a lot of army or militia officers here. Lincoln would say that he did. He did remember Anderson. That Anderson stood out to him. Very disappointed in his Black Hawk War service. Young West Point graduate, he's probably thinking, European style war, and a little bit like that picture at the top right hand corner, right? We'll line up and we're fighting Napoleon, and that's not what we see. We are in pursuit of, along with warriors, old men, women, children. It's the whole Black Hawk War is really kind of it's a sad situation. As so many of these Indian conflicts are, and Anderson kind of comes away with that very sympathetic to the Native cause. Following this, Second Seminole War, America's next major Native conflict. He's down here in Florida fighting the Seminoles. Next slide. Knee deep in the Everglades. Probably catches, he does get malaria, probably from his time in Florida. Soldiers at the time called it the Florida disease. So this will affect his health. Malaria is one of those diseases that just hangs on. You never quite get rid of it. It always flares up from time to time, especially with the lack of medical knowledge we've got back in the day here. He could have avoided service in Florida. He was a recognized man in the Army. He had written some technical stuff, translated French artillery tactics into English. Staff jobs were there, right? He's a favorite of top people. But Anderson very much believes where a company goes, their captain should go. As an Army officer, if his men are in Florida, he should be in Florida. So he is down there fighting the Seminoles. They'll pull him out of Florida, and he takes part in the Trail of Tears, kind of an administrative position. Next slide. As they'll put him in Tennessee to organize, right, getting these people off their lands, moving them west to Oklahoma. Like a lot of Army officers, he's very, very sympathetic to the cause. Feels very bad for these folks. Will do his duty. This has to be done, but very, very sympathetic to the cause. We have letters that he writes his family, especially the letters that he writes his mother, that just how sad this whole thing is. People being removed from their land. He makes the comparison, how would we feel if this were us? But after this long letter, how bad we feel for these people, he ensures her, don't worry, not planning on marrying a Cherokee woman. My sympathies haven't gone that far. One thing I do find interesting is one thing that Anderson says in these letters, about the Trail of Tears. We're not calling it the Trail of Tears at that time, but he'll point out, as bad as all of this is, as terrible as the conditions are, as the your land is being taken away from you, you're being sent to someplace you don't know. Just a whole tragic story here. The Cherokee take it with, as the English would say, a stiff upper lip, and no tears were shed. These were tough, hardy people, and like I said, stiff upper lip. no tears, which is kind of funny since we now call this the Trail of Tears. But Anderson didn't see any, but very sympathetic to the Cherokee cause. Um, Next, country goes to war with Mexico. Anderson is right there at the forefront. U.S. troops land at Veracruz, um, the largest seaborne invasion until Normandy in the Second World War. Um, Anderson's one of the first men on the beach. He is part of the siege of Veracruz. We fire cannon into the city and marches with the army all the way to Mexico City. Next slide. He is seriously wounded on the outskirts of the city in the fighting, the Battle of Molina del Rey on the outskirts of the city. Wounded, decorated, but top of the malaria, serious couple of bullet wounds aren't good for the health following this. His time in Mexico really kind of sees the horrors of war, right? I mean, it's got to be a better way for people to work out their problems than this. We're firing cannons into the city of Veracruz to get them to surrender, and he's writing home, who's on the receiving end of this? It's families, it's civilians, it's really. We see a lot of this, this thinking, and we get to South Carolina, we get to 1861, and really trying to avoid war. He's no fan, is where we're getting at this point. Now, following Mexico, once he recovers, off to the Canadian border. He will go along, next slide, with Winfield Scott, the great American general, and tension on the Canadian border. There's a revolt going on among the French Canadians. We're looking at the potential of, once again, revolution in Canada turning into war with the United States. There's a border crisis here. Anderson is up there with Scott, helping negotiate peace, helping make sure this doesn't turn into a third war with Great Britain. So Anderson very much learning how to be the diplomat up here on the Canadian border. Following this, it's back to West Point. Next slide. And as a West Point instructor, he instructs most of the future officers in the American Civil War. All the artillery officers, North and South, use the guidebook that he wrote on artillery tactics, and were his students. Even General Beauregard, who was firing the shots into Fort Sumter there in April of 1861, was one of his former students. So Anderson is an interesting story. I mean, just definitely the short highlights here. His actions and sometimes his inactions made it possible for Lincoln to fight this war, to get the support he needed. His story, it's going to get pushed to the side. And of course, after April of 1861, the Civil War gets so much bigger. And when you have, like I said, the Gettysburgs, the Antietam's, the Vicksburgs, your General Grant's, your Lee's, the story of how it begins, the story of those days of we're not exactly sure how this is going to go, kind of gets buried. It kind of gets pushed aside because the events that follow are so massive. And I've come to feel it's a little bit of a wrong. just as an historian. This was a story that needed to be told. I think Anderson, this battle at Fort Sumter, needed to be pushed a little more in the forefront than it has been. And hopefully, I've corrected this just a little bit with this book. As a writer and historian, you write something like this, and you really hope somebody continues on, grabs the story, and I can do it better, or I can do it more, and so hopefully that'll happen. I would take that as the great compliment. So, thank you. Open for questions.
Thank you so much. All right, give me 1 second to navigate so I can see questions in the chat. And while people are starting to generate those, let me go ahead and start with one myself. So when you were working on a project like this, Dr. Moody, we talk a lot to our students about research methods. Like, what are your research methods like? What kind of sources are you looking for? Where do you find those sources? What's your process like there?
So step number one is those secondary sources, other books, journal articles that have been written. And you take a man like Anderson, okay, who has he dealt with? Who's been in his life? And you read those biographies. You read those books, you start there. And of course, you go through those bibliographies with a fine-tooth comb to see what's there. So that's step number one. Step number two is you start hunting up the archives. Where are the original documents? Got very lucky down at the University of Florida at their library. They've got the Clinch family papers, and of course his wife was a Clinch. That worked out very well. The Anderson family papers are in a private collection, the Filson Center up in Louisville. And really, where I was the luckiest is Anderson's daughter collected all the papers she could get her hands on, donated them to the Library of Congress. So I was up at the Library of Congress, and it was all there. And as an historian, I mean, you've got the boxes of papers, and you're going through, and I mean, he wrote this. This is his signature. This is this is West Point diploma that they handed him, and he swelled with pride over, and you're holding it in your hands. It really is quite an experience. Newspapers, I mean, obviously newspapers you have to take with a grain of salt. They don't have all the information, there's bias, that kind of thing. But those contemporary newspapers are massive and huge. And luckily, we've entered the stage of the game where so much is digital, so much is scanned, so much is searchable. I mean, it's just, I think step one is the internet research, because the archives are putting more and more out there that you can just do your research sitting in your office.
Which is much better than skimming through microfiche, as I know from personal experience.
Oh, I do miss that sometimes, though.
You must not get motion sick, because it usually gave me a terrible headache. So you did mention that Anderson was here in Florida for the Seminole War. Jacksonville obviously was well in existence by that point in time. Do you know if he was ever in this area, or like his movements more specifically in the area?
So he does pass through. Most of his action is going to be in the very south, right there on the line with the Everglades. So he will go through the St. Johns River. He will pass through St. Augustine. He'll take the St. Johns River all the way down into what will eventually be Orlando. And he will be stationed in St. Augustine pre-Mexican War for a little bit. When he goes to war in Mexico, his wife and children will stay at the Clinch plantation. That's around Fort Drain, closer to Ocala. So, but Jacksonville's a pass-through point, unfortunately.
as we were for so many people at that
Right.
time.
Now, it is interesting, the Jacksonville connection, his father-in-law, of course, Clinch, has two sons, has a daughter, a lot of property, including property here in Jacksonville. Anderson's brother-in-laws serve in the Confederate Army, one in the Georgia militia, one in the regular service. And at the end of the war, all their property is taken away from them, including some of the land here in Jacksonville. And part of that land through the Freedmen's Bureau is handed to some of the colored regiments. I think maybe the 20th is given land here in Jacksonville. And what the family did is, okay, here's Robert Anderson. He's the hero of the nation. Let's give the land to our sister, and maybe Anderson can get the land back for the family. So he ends up writing Oliver Otis Howard, who's the first general of the first head of the Freedmen's Bureau. And I don't think I think he's a little sick of his brother-in-laws probably by this point. So the letter he writes is not too much. I'm writing because my wife asked me to write, is the kind of the sense you get out of this letter. And the letter he gets back from Howard is great to hear from you, but tough luck. But I'm not exactly sure where that land is. I'd be interested to try to dig that up at some point.
Would be interesting. Okay, so we do have a question in the chat. How did Anderson figure into Civil War memory of Fort Sumter and in the reconciliation process of the late 19th and 20th century, early 20th century?
So when it comes to Fort Sumter, it kind of, as we move on, they start writing the war. I really think he gets poor treatment in the historiography of Fort Sumter. And one of the things, and this is the quote that gets overkilled, before the firing starts, they come out there and they give you an opportunity to surrender. He tells the Confederate officers that have come out there, look, I'm sympathetic to your cause. As my officers know, right, you're right, these abolitionists are wrong. And that's always presented as exactly what he said, right? He's a pro-Southerner, and the Northerners that write the history of the war, right, we kind of kick him because of that. But I think kind of looking at the whole story, you almost have to think of Fort Sumter as a hostage situation. And the kind of the first line, when you're talking with the bank robbers, hey, look, I'm pulling for you guys, right? I'm on your side. Don't shoot me. I think there's a little bit of that. Let's everybody calm down. So I think that comment and the Clinch connection, that hurts him moving forward. For reconciliation, actually plays a larger role. His health's failing him. He's got less than a decade following the Civil War, but afterwards, he really wanted reconciliation. He really wanted forgive and forget here, and he saw West Point as the way. I mean, you've got all of these Army officers, North and South, who were great friends before. We fought this war against one another. We really should come back together. And he helped form the West Point Alumni Association, and its goal was to pull those officers back together. Now, his health never let him really take a leadership role in there, but he is the guy that got the ball rolling, that got that started.
Right. Okay, so Anderson's life is a good example of sort of how unsettled the times were, even leading up to the Civil War. Whereas, sort of when we think about that time, what everybody thinks of is the Civil War. And you talked about, the number of books written about Lincoln and everything. Do you think that the sort of like emotional prominence of the Civil War and our sort of collective consciousness tends to sort of flatten out the conception of history? In the sort of the bracketing time there, like we see the thing because it was a big interfamily conflict and we kind of tend to get distracted.
I'd agree with that. Definitely. And eh, I think when that happens sometimes too, you forget about the individuals.
Mhm.
And we've got families and we've got our own lives we want to live and that type of thing. And we're not just characters in a history book.
And from our limited work with some of the history of Jacksonville stuff that we've done here, it's also become increasingly evident to me that, something like the Seminole War was sort of an early training ground for people who wound up being in the leadership positions in later conflicts. Not that it contributed greatly always, but I was
Right.
very interested in that because I just didn't ever think about the fact that there were these multiple conflicts leading up to the Civil War. And so you're not walking in to your first war in 100 years or something like that. You've
Right.
got a trained force. So all right.
Yeah, the
uh,
many dealt with in the Second Seminole War. I mean, it's a who's list of Civil War generals. So yeah, it was a training ground.
all right, so I've got one more question for you. We're almost at time, and I just wanted to ask if we can get you to confirm here for us today that your next book will be on the political opinions of the wives of Civil War generals and how they impacted their husbands.
I'm seriously thinking about that because I keep coming across examples. I think I get a publisher to go with that.
I think you could. Yeah. It's a great example of what you were talking about in terms of an important thing that hasn't particularly been covered and a sort of rare perspective that hasn't been considered. So I will put in a vote and we promise to order an early edition copy if you decide to go
Okay.
that way. All
I
right.
appreciate that.
Fantastic. All right. With that, I don't want to hold anybody too much longer. It doesn't look like we have any more comments in the chat except for one. Scott Matthews also thinks that's a brilliant idea for a
Okay.
book. So
Well,
that's two
Scott thinks
votes.
it's a great idea. I'm doing it.
Now you're stuck. You're just going to have to
That's
go with that.
right.
All right. So I want to thank everybody who came out today so much for participating. And all of you guys have a great afternoon. Thanks so much.
Thank you.